Lecture 19: Cephalopod Brains and Modular Intelligence. Introduction. The alien mind in the ocean. Picture yourself diving in a twilight reef, face to face with an uncanny intelligence. A pair of unblinking horizontal pupils watches you from a crevice. You notice a bulbous head half hidden among swaying seaweed and sponge, and 8 sinuous arms draped around like living vines. Suddenly, the creature shifts color in a ripple of greens and oranges, perfectly mimicking its surroundings. Only those curious eyes give it away. Then, with a sudden jet, it shoots off and vanishes in the murk. You've just met a common octopus, an animal often described as the closest thing to an intelligent alien here on Earth. Octopuses, along with their cephalopod cousins, cuttlefish and squid, represent an island of mental complexity in the vast sea of invertebrates. They evolved along a completely separate path from our own, diverging over 500 million years ago from the lineage that led to vertebrates. In that time, they developed large brains and elaborate behaviors entirely independently. If we can connect with an octopus as a fellow sentient being, it is not due to shared ancestry or brain design. It is because evolution built minds twice over. In meeting an octopus, we encounter a radical alternative model of what intelligence can be. To appreciate how extraordinary cephalopod brains are, it helps to compare them to other creatures. Nervous systems in the animal kingdom take many forms. Jellyfish and their kin, the cnidarians, have diffuse nerve nets with no central brain at all, a loose mesh of neurons controlling simple reflexes. Insects and other arthropods concentrate neurons into segmental ganglia and a brain, a design sometimes called a ladder-like nervous system. Vertebrates like ourselves push centralization furthest, packing nearly all neural processing into a single dorsal brain linked to a spinal cord. Cephalopods stand out by combining both approaches. They possess a large, centralized brain, but also spread a huge portion of their nervous system into the periphery of the body. In fact, a common octopus, Octopus vulgaris, carries roughly 500 million neurons in total, comparable to the brain of a small mammal, yet over 2/3 of those neurons reside not in the head, but in its arms. The result is a creature with a modular, distributed intelligence. One might say an octopus has 1 big brain and 8 smaller ones. Its body is suffused with nervous tissue, blurring the line between brain and limb. This unique design poses fascinating questions. How does an octopus coordinate its 8 arms without tangling itself in knots? Can each arm think for itself? How does memory and learning work in such an alien neural architecture? Does an octopus have emotions or even dreams? In this lecture, we will explore these questions by diving into the cephalopod brain's key features. From the renowned vertical lobe, the octopus's apparent memory center, to the autonomy of its arms, from signs of emotional states to the mysteries of cephalopod sleep and possible dreaming. Along the way, we will weave in broader insights, comparing cephalopod neurobiology with vertebrates and other invertebrates, and considering what this distributed embodied mind means for our understanding of cognition. The tone of our exploration is scholarly yet narrative, engaging with the subject not just as a list of facts, but as a story of how evolution engineered a mind utterly unlike our own. By the end, we'll see how the octopus, and to some extent squid and cuttlefish, force us to rethink our frameworks of mind, from embodied cognition to predictive coding, and even draw philosophical parallels to artificial intelligence and alien minds. Let's begin with the core of the octopus brain's learning abilities, the famous vertical lobe. The vertical lobe, a vital center for learning and memory. At the center of the octopus's brain lies a structure called the vertical lobe, a dense cluster of neurons that has captivated scientists for decades. In the mid-20th century, pioneering neurobiologist J.Z. Young performed classic experiments that revealed the importance of this region. Octopuses are capable of remarkable learning. They can be trained to distinguish shapes, navigate simple mazes, or open jars to get at tasty crabs inside. Young discovered that if the vertical lobe is surgically removed or damaged, an octopus's ability to form new memories and refine its behavior is dramatically impaired. An octopus without a functioning vertical lobe can still perform simple tasks and respond to stimuli, but it struggles with tasks involving learning from experience. For example, a normal octopus can learn to prefer a square shape over a circle if one consistently leads to a food reward. An octopus lacking its vertical lobe fails to make or retain such a discrimination. This indicated that the vertical lobe is a crucial site for memory storage and learning plasticity in cephalopods. Essentially, their higher learning center. Anatomically, the vertical lobe is part of the octopus's supraesophageal mass, the brain region above the esophagus. Recall that an octopus's brain encircles its throat like a donut. Despite the exotic layout, we can draw parallels to vertebrate brains. Young himself noted morphological and functional resemblances between the octopus vertical lobe and parts of the vertebrate brain involved in learning, such as the hippocampus, which is central to memory in mammals, or the cerebral cortex. In evolutionary terms, these similarities are a case of convergent evolution. Cephalopods and vertebrates evolved complex brains independently, yet both ended up with specialized memory centers. The octopus vertical lobe is sometimes likened to an invertebrate version of an associative cortex, a place where information from various senses converges and is integrated and stored. What makes the vertical lobe especially fascinating is its microscopic organization. Recent research using modern techniques like electron microscopy and connectome mapping has revealed that this lobe contains on the order of 20-25 million neurons, arranged in a distinctive network. Most of these neurons are tiny interneurons, called amacrine cells in cephalopod. Literature packed into layered columns. The vertical lobe circuit is largely feed-forward. Neurons receive inputs from lower brain regions, like the optic lobes, which process vision, and pass information through to output neurons that influence behavior, with relatively few feedback loops. In other words, information flows in one direction in this network, forming something of a funnel from many small neurons to fewer big output cells. This is quite different from the heavily recursive, looped circuits of the mammalian cortex, yet it achieves a similar result: the ability to strengthen or weaken synapses based on experience. In fact, neuroscientists have observed long-term potentiation, LTP, in the octopus vertical lobe, the same synaptic phenomenon believed to underlie learning and memory in mammalian brains. The octopus's brain evolved its own way to store memories by strengthening connections between neurons in this lobe when the animal learns. To paint a picture, imagine an octopus learning a new trick, say opening a child-proof pill bottle to get a snack inside. Visual information about the bottle, its shape, color, how it's situated, streams from the eyes to the large optic lobes, which handle visual processing, analogous to our visual cortex. From there, the processed information is relayed to the vertical lobe. At the same time, tactile information from the arms exploring the bottle's cap, how it feels, how it resists turning, travels up to the brain, and also eventually reaches the vertical lobe via other lobes. In the vertical lobe, these inputs converge and activate certain networks of interneurons. If the octopus succeeds in opening the bottle and gets a reward, a tasty crab, the vertical lobe network undergoing activation may undergo a lasting change. The synapses between those neurons strengthen. The next time the octopus encounters a similar bottle, those strengthened pathways allow the octopus to remember, aha, I've managed this before, and replicate the successful maneuver far. Experiments support this narrative. Octopuses become quicker at solving repeated tasks, showing learning curves, and if the vertical lobe is removed, that improvement with practice largely disappears. Interestingly, the vertical lobe doesn't act entirely alone. It's part of a system often termed the frontal vertical lobe complex. The vertical lobe works in tandem with adjacent frontal lobes, which receive inputs from various sensory pathways. Together, they form a higher-level decision-making and learning center. Researchers think this system not only stores memories, but also plays a role in decision-making, perhaps akin to how our frontal cortex uses memories to guide choices. In octopuses, one hypothesis, from Young and others, is that the frontal vertical system helps an octopus decide whether to attack or ignore a potential prey or object. For instance, a small crab scuttling by. The octopus's lower centers might have a reflex to grab it, but if past experience taught the octopus that similar-looking crabs were foul-tasting or dangerous, the vertical lobe might insert a veto, suppressing the attack response. This suggests a hierarchical control. The vertical lobe can modulate the simpler stimulus responses elsewhere, injecting a learned bias, either positive or negative, into how the octopus reacts. In this way, the vertical lobe is crucial for more flexible, context-dependent behavior, the hallmark of intelligent animals. From a historical perspective, the study of the vertical lobe in octopuses has deep roots. After World War II, scientists like J.Z. Young and later colleagues, Martin Wells, B.B. Boycott and others, turned the octopus into a model for understanding learning. This might sound surprising. One might expect rats or primates to be the go-to models for learning, but these researchers recognized that octopuses offered a unique comparative perspective. They trained octopuses in laboratories to do visual discriminations, showing them shapes or patterns and rewarding certain choices, and meticulously recorded their learning progress. These early studies demonstrated that octopuses have both short-term and long-term memory, and that the vertical lobe is essential for the latter. An octopus can learn something and remember it for days, even weeks, despite having a natural lifespan of only a year or two. Such findings were striking and helped elevate the octopus's reputation from a mere sea curiosity to a subject of serious cognitive research. The vertical lobe's allure also lies in the suggestion that it might be a universal solution to learning that arose independently. There's an almost poetic symmetry. On one side of the evolutionary tree, vertebrates developed the hippocampus and cortex to encode experiences. On another distant branch, the molluscan brain, typically simple in a snail, burgeoned in cephalopods to form the vertical lobe system. Both systems use networks of small repeating units, neurons, to associate and store patterns. This is a prime example of convergent evolution of complex brains, nature finding similar answers to the problem of processing information, even when building with very different materials and blueprints. Before we move on, it's worth noting that not only octopuses have vertical lobes. All colloids, the group including octopuses, squids and cuttlefish, have some version of this structure. Cuttlefish, for instance, also have a well-developed vertical lobe and show excellent learning abilities. Cuttlefish can remember visual patterns and even perform some of the same tricks octopuses do in lab tests. Squids, being more specialized for fast predation and often social behavior, have large optic lobes and somewhat different brain emphases, but they too possess the vertical lobe for learning. The vertical lobe is thus a hallmark of the cephalopod advanced brain, setting these creatures apart from the vast majority of invertebrates that rely mostly on fixed instincts. It is the neural engine of adaptability in the octopus, the core that allows experience to shape behavior. In summary, the vertical lobe exemplifies how octopuses combine modularity with integration. It's a distinct module of the brain devoted to higher processing, yet it doesn't function in isolation. It continually communicates with other parts like sensory lobes and motor centers, to influence the octopus's actions. As we shall see, this theme, independent modules, connected by information flow, recurs throughout cephalopod intelligence. Now, having examined the seat of memory and learning in the octopus, let's extend our view to the most distinctive feature of these animals, their 8 flexible arms, and ask how much brain lies within them. Clever arms, intelligence in the limbs. Perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of octopus biology is the degree of independence and sophistication found in its arms. We humans are accustomed to having our intelligence concentrated in our head. Our arms and legs are mere executors of the brain's commands, with only basic reflex circuits in the spinal cord. An octopus turns this arrangement on its head, or rather, on its arms. Each octopus arm contains a dense network of neurons, roughly 40 million neurons per arm on average, collected into clusters called ganglia that run the length of the arm like beads on a string. In total, around 350 million neurons, over 60% of the octopus's nervous system, reside outside the central brain, in the arms and surrounding periphery. In a very real sense, an octopus thinks with its arms as much as with its head. To appreciate how radical this is, consider an arm of the octopus exploring its environment. The arm is covered with suckers, up to 200 per arm in some species, and each sucker is a marvel. It can grip with incredible force, flex in any direction, and is loaded with chemosensors and touch receptors. Each sucker can taste and feel anything it contacts, because it has receptor cells for chemicals and texture. It has a migration cerveau, and crucially, each sucker and the segment of arm around it have their own local neural circuits. If you gently poke a single sucker or offer it a bit of food, the sucker can respond by itself, contracting and trying to grab, without the central brain explicitly telling it to do so. This is because the arm's neurons form local reflex loops. In fact, experiments have shown that even a severed octopus arm can perform coordinated actions for a short time. It can grasp objects, recoil from pain, and execute basic movements like elongating or curling. This almost spooky phenomenon illustrates that a lot of motor control is handled in the arm itself. The arm's ganglia contain patterns for movement, for example, how to bend the arm, or how to operate a sucker, that can be enacted without higher approval. It's as if each arm has a mind of its own, at least for low-level tasks. However, saying an octopus has 8 independent brains would be an oversimplification. More accurate is to say it has 1 brain and 8 highly intelligent arms. The arms are autonomous to a degree, but they are still interconnected with the central brain and with each other. The relationship between the central brain and the arms is a remarkable case of distributed control. Neuroscientists and behaviorists now think of it this way. The octopus's central brain sets overall goals and integrates information, while the arms handle much of the nitty-gritty execution. For instance, if an octopus decides to reach for a piece of food it sees, the central brain doesn't micromanage every joint and sucker. Instead, it might issue a kind of high-level command. Arm 4, there's food over to the left, go get it. Arm number 4, counting from the middle, will then, largely on its own, generate the detailed movement sequence to extend, probe, and grab the food. One beautiful example of this local arm control is how octopuses create temporary joints in their arms. An octopus arm has no bones. It's a muscular hydrostat, essentially a muscular balloon that can bend anywhere. When an octopus grabs a piece of food with the tip of an arm, it needs to bring that food to its mouth at the center of its body. High-speed videos have shown that the arm will form an elbow-like bend as it retracts the food. How? The arm generates 2 waves of muscle contraction. One travels inward from the tip, the other outward from the base, and where these waves meet, the arm bends and creates a fixed joint angle. This effectively forms an elbow that then guides the food straight to the mouth. All of this happens without a skeletal structure, and presumably without the brain explicitly calculating, make joint here at 30% along the arm. It seems to be an emergent property of the arm's muscular control circuitry, likely orchestrated by the arm's own ganglia in response to stretch and tension feedback. In other words, the arm figures out how to bend optimally to accomplish the task. The brain simply knows that once the arm has the food, it will deliver it. The brain doesn't need the details of how the arm contorts itself to do so. Another striking demonstration of arm-level smarts comes from behavioral experiments. A classic study placed octopuses in a situation where they had to reach into a clear plastic maze with one arm to get food, but at one point the arm had to leave water and thus lost its chemical cues, relying only on visual guidance from the eyes. Researchers found that octopuses could indeed guide their arm using vision alone to navigate the maze, showing that the central brain can direct an arm when needed. But interestingly, observers noted that while the arm was finding its way, it still did a lot of its own local exploring. Its suckers would feel along the walls. The arm would make small adjustments on the fly. This suggested a two-tier system: top-down control from the brain to get the arm to the general location and choose the correct path, combined with bottom-up control from the arm for fine adjustments and feedback. The arm and brain were essentially collaborating. The brain set the goal, go through left tunnel, and the arm autonomously handled moment-to-moment tactics like, if wall here, then curve a bit. For many years, scientists imagined that because of this autonomy, the octopus might not even know exactly where its arms are at any moment. Perhaps each arm was off doing its own thing. Recent research is beginning to clarify this relationship. In one study, octopuses were trained in a Y-shaped maze, where only one arm could go in at a time to find food, and the animals had to choose the correct path, left or right, based on a reward, the catch. The octopus's vision was blocked. It had to rely on the arm's feeling and perhaps some sense of the arm's position, proprioception, to succeed. Remarkably, octopuses learned to consistently insert an arm into the correct side of the maze to get the reward, indicating that the central brain learned which way to direct the arm even without seeing inside. Even more telling, once the task was learned, the octopus could use any of its arms to get the reward. It didn't have to always use the same arm that originally learned the task. This means the information about go left to get food was stored centrally, likely in the vertical lobe or associated memory system, and made available to all arms. So while each arm on its own did not learn the task individually, the octopus as a whole did, and then it could deploy that knowledge through any limb. The conclusion from such studies is that the arms and brain maintain rich communication. The arms send sensory information inward, what they touch, how they're moving, and the brain can integrate that and adjust behavior, then send commands outward that any arm can act on. It's a delicate balance of autonomy and integration. Comparative neurobiology provides insight here. Many invertebrates have somewhat decentralized nervous systems. For example, a lobster has nerve ganglia in each segment controlling local movements, but the octopus takes it to an extreme. It's as if each arm is equivalent to an entire snake or starfish appendage that has its own mini-brain. Yet, unlike a starfish, which truly has no center, a starfish can literally survive as pieces that regrow, an octopus does have a central brain that keeps the creature unified. One way to think of it is to imagine your own spinal cord and peripheral nerves were vastly smarter, capable of complex pattern generation, and your brain's role was more about motivation, memory, and arbitration among the limbs. In fact, humans have a tiny taste of this. Our spinal cord can produce rhythmic patterns like walking motions, central pattern generators, with little input, and we have reflexes that don't require conscious thought. But we normally remain very much in control of our limbs' detailed movements via the brain. The octopus offloads much more control to its limbs. This self-organization in the periphery is a concept that has intrigued roboticists. Engineers designing soft robots and multi-armed robots look to the octopus as a model, because controlling each joint of a soft tentacle robot centrally is computationally overwhelming. Instead, giving the robot's limbs local controllers, like the octopus's ganglia, that can respond to immediate stimuli may be more efficient. The octopus, through millions of years, evolved such a solution to handle the huge computational issue of coordinating 8 infinitely flexible arms. It leverages what some call embodied intelligence, the idea that the body and its local control circuits can do smart things on its own, reducing the burden on the brain. One fascinating discovery in recent years was how octopus arms avoid tying themselves in knots or sticking to their own skin. Think about it. With 8 arms exploring chaotically, how do they prevent an arm's suckers from accidentally latching onto another arm, or the octopus's own head? It turns out octopus skin secretes a chemical signal that their suckers recognize as self. Normally, a sucker will reflexively stick to almost anything, rock, prey, the glass of an aquarium. But researchers found that when an octopus sucker touches the skin of its own body or another arm, it usually does not grip strongly. The arm seems to know, this is me. If an arm is completely severed, and thus the brain is no longer coordinating, after a while it loses that inhibition. And an octopus's detached arm can sometimes latch onto the octopus's own skin briefly, a phenomenon observed in labs, suggesting the central brain also plays a part in actively orchestrating self-avoidance. But the majority of the time, a combination of local chemical cues and central coordination prevents self-entanglement. This is another layer of elegance in the octopus's arm intelligence. An interplay of reflex and centralized oversight ensures the arms usually work in concert rather than at cross purposes. So, does an octopus arm have a mind of its own? One might say each arm is less like an independent mind and more like a semi-autonomous agent within a larger mind. The arms can handle low-level decisions, like how to orient a sucker to get a better grip, or how to locally wiggle through a narrow crack. But the central brain can call arms to attention, focus them, or integrate what they find. It is a bit as if the octopus is a commander-in-chief, issuing orders to skilled lieutenants, the arms, trusting them to execute details, but still needing reports back, and sometimes giving new directives based on the results. In cognitive science terms, this is a modular intelligence. Multiple components, each with some specialization and degree of freedom, communicating in a network. It forces us to broaden what we think of as thinking. The octopus doesn't sit in its head and model every arm's movement. It thinks by doing, using the arms to probe and learn, essentially outsourcing some cognitive work to its body. This ties into concepts of embodied cognition, the notion that intelligence emerges from the entire organism's interactions with the world, not just from computation sealed inside a brain. The octopus is an extreme case. Its nervous system is literally embodied throughout its form. Before leaving the arms, consider the lifestyle differences in cephalopods. Octopuses are generally solitary hunters and crawlers, relying heavily on their arms to explore and manipulate. Squid, on the other hand, often swim in open water and can be social, using rapid jetting and coordinated fin movements. Squid still have decentralized control. Their arms and 2 long feeding tentacles have ganglia too, but their behavior is less about crawling exploration and more about quick strikes and group schooling. Still, even in squid, the principles of local versus central control hold. For example, the squid's rapid escape jet, mediated by the giant nerve fibers, is a reflex arc of sorts, ensuring it doesn't need to decide to flee. A local circuit triggers a jet if there's a startling stimulus. In octopus, there isn't one giant escape reflex. Instead, each arm can independently withdraw from harm, and the octopus as a whole can flee if enough arms signal danger. It's as though the decision to flee in an octopus might bubble up from the arm's consensus. Many of my arms are recoiling. Something's wrong. Time to jet away. This is somewhat speculative, but it underscores how differently an octopus's intelligence might work. It's bottom-up as much as top-down. We will revisit this idea when we talk about cognitive frameworks, but for now we have a picture of an octopus as a creature whose limbs are extraordinarily empowered, sensing, acting, and even remembering, in brief, on their own, under the loose but effective governance of a central brain, with the vertical lobe providing memory and learning, and the arms providing decentralized problem-solving. We next turn to a less tangible aspect of cephalopod intelligence: their inner experiences. Do octopuses have anything akin to emotions or personality? How do they behave beyond pure instinctual action? In the following section, we'll delve into what is known and suspected about the emotional lives of cephalopods and how these too reflect a complex, perhaps even conscious mind. Emotions and personality in the cephalopod mind. When we think of emotions, we often think of mammals, the wagging tail of a happy dog, the complex social bonds of primates, or even the moods of a cat. Invertebrates traditionally haven't been granted much emotional inner life in the public imagination. They seem too far removed, too machine-like. But as we learn more about octopuses and their kin, this view is changing. Cephalopods may not shed tears or sing in joy, but they exhibit behaviors that hint at individual personalities, moods, and perhaps basic emotions. Aquarists and researchers who work closely with octopuses often come away convinced that each octopus is an individual with a distinct temperament. One octopus might be shy and reclusive, another bold and curious. Some octopuses in captivity become quick to interact with their human caretakers, reaching arms up as if asking to play or accepting food directly, while others constantly hide and recoil from contact. These are anecdotal observations, but they've been borne out by more systematic studies. For instance, marine biologist Jennifer Mather and colleagues conducted experiments in the 1990S and 2000S, where they presented octopuses with various stimuli, like a toy, a crab, or a mildly alarming object, and recorded their responses. They found consistent differences between individuals. Some consistently explored new objects, as if curious. Some consistently tried to flee, as if anxious or shy. And some would half attack, half play, a sort of aggressive interest. These patterns were stable enough to be considered analogous to personality traits. Scientists identified dimensions akin to activity, bold/exploratory, versus exploratory passive, reactivity, calm vs aggressive, and avoidance, shy vs curious, in octopuses. This suggests that beyond just reflex, octopuses have behavioral tendencies that differ from one animal to the next, essentially personality. What about emotions per se, transient internal states like fear, anger, or even something pleasurable? We cannot directly know what an octopus feels, but we infer from behavior and physiology. Consider fear or stress. An octopus threatened by a predator will jet away and hide, releasing ink into the water as a smokescreen. Those are classic fear responses, but more tellingly, an octopus can remember a negative experience and alter its behavior in the long term. Recent groundbreaking research demonstrated that octopuses likely experience a form of pain emotion. In these experiments, octopuses that received a mildly painful stimulus, for example a dilute acid solution, briefly injected into one arm, which would cause an unpleasant, lasting sensation, began to avoid places associated with that experience. They were given a choice of chambers in a tank, one chamber where they had experienced the discomfort and another neutral chamber. They consistently avoided the location where the bad experience happened. Moreover, if given a pain relief, like an anesthetic on that arm, they showed a preference for a location where they got relief. This behavior is strikingly similar to how rodents or other mammals demonstrate the emotional component of pain. It's not just the reflex of pulling away, but a lasting negative affect that the animal tries to avoid in the future. Neurophysiologically, these octopuses showed changes in their neurotransmitter levels, like heightened activity in pathways analogous to those mediating pain in vertebrates. In short, the evidence strongly suggests octopuses feel something akin to affective pain, a sort of proto-emotional state of distress or discomfort that persists and influences their future choices. It's not just ouch, and then nothing, it's more, that was awful. I don't want that to happen again over there. This finding aligns with a growing recognition of cephalopod sentience. In 2012, a group of neuroscientists signed the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, explicitly including octopuses as animals that likely possess the neurological substrates for conscious experience. More recently, governments have begun to include cephalopods in animal welfare legislation. For example, the UK in 2021 formally recognized octopuses and their relatives as sentient beings that can feel pain and suffering. These moves are based on accumulating scientific evidence that octopuses have the capacity for quite complex states. Consider an octopus in an aquarium that has figured out how to cause mischief. One famous anecdote involves an octopus who repeatedly squirted water at a particular overhead light to short-circuit it. In a New Zealand aquarium, an octopus named Sid developed a habit of shooting water out of his tank at a spotlight that he seemingly found annoying. Each time he hit the light, the power would trip and the light would go out. The aquarium staff would reset it, only for Sid to do it again whenever the light bothered him. This game became so problematic and expensive that ultimately the octopus was released back to the wild. What are we to make of this behavior? It's hard not to anthropomorphize. It appears as if the octopus was annoyed by the bright light and decided to do something about it, even learning the causal relationship that squirting water causes the light to fail. Whether we label that annoyance or not, it certainly wasn't purely instinctual. It was a deliberate, learned behavior targeting a specific nuisance that implies a kind of motivation and, perhaps, a simple emotion driving the action. Another oft-repeated story: octopuses in labs or public aquariums have been known to recognize individual humans. One keeper might always bring food and handle the octopus gently, call them the nice keeper, while another might occasionally prod the octopus or perform minor procedures for tank cleaning, the mean keeper. Experiments and observations show that octopuses can tell these people apart. Even if they wear identical uniforms, they will behave differently, for instance, extending an arm readily to the familiar, friendly person, but squirting water or shrinking away from the one they've associated with irritation. They may even change color. Octopuses can turn dark or spiky in texture when agitated, pale or smooth when calm, in the presence of one versus the other. This implies not only excellent memory, recognizing a human face or gait, but also a kind of associative emotional response, like or dislike. Keep in mind, octopuses are not naturally social with humans, or even with each other typically, so this ability to discriminate and respond differentially isn't for mating or bonding. It seems to be an emergent property of their advanced cognition that they can extend to humans. It raises the possibility that they have the rudiments of what we'd call social emotions. They can learn to trust or to distrust, to be comfortable or stressed in someone's presence. Cephalopods also display behaviors that look like play. Play behavior is often considered a sign of higher intelligence and even emotional enjoyment in animals. In one study, octopuses were given floating pill bottles or toys in their tanks. A few of them engaged in what looked like play. They would blow a jet of water to push the object into the water current, watch it float back, then do it again, repetitively, almost as if playing catch with themselves. One octopus was observed doing this with a bottle for dozens of iterations. It's hard to ascribe a survival reason for this behavior. It wasn't trying to eat the bottle, and after confirming it wasn't food, it just seemed to be entertained by the activity of bouncing the object around in the current. Not all octopuses did this. Interestingly, it seemed to be a subset that had that quirky trait, which again feels like personality. Some are playful, others not. Play could indicate a level of cognitive surplus. They have time to kill and mental resources to devote to non-essentials, and perhaps something like enjoyment, or at least intrinsic interest. It may also serve a cognitive function, maybe it's practicing movements or testing what objects do. But it's strikingly similar to how intelligent mammals or birds will play with objects out of curiosity or boredom. Now, how about color changes and body language as emotional expression? Octopuses and cuttlefish are famed for their camouflage abilities. They change color and skin texture to blend with backgrounds or to communicate. In cuttlefish and squid, complex skin patterns often serve social signaling. Like during mating or hierarchies, squids have polarized patterns to signal to each other. Octopuses are less social, but they do use colors as signals occasionally. For example, a gloomy octopus might go pale when submitting to a more aggressive octopus, or turn bold colors when threatened or angry. In captivity, octopuses have been seen to flush a dark red or even flare patterns when highly agitated, such as during a risky situation or interaction with a diver they dislike. Conversely, a calm, resting octopus often adopts gentle, mottled earth tones that match the seafloor, a kind of neutral state. While much of this is instinctive camouflage or bluff, a way to say, "I'm big and bad, don't mess with me," or "nothing to see here, I'm just a rock," some researchers have wondered if certain color displays might correlate with internal states akin to emotion. A tantalizing hint came from studies on cuttlefish sleep, which we will discuss more soon, where during active sleep, cuttlefish display rapid skin color changes, as if reacting to some internal experience, potentially a dream or memory. Emotion-like states also manifest in how octopuses deal with challenges. They can get frustrated. If an octopus is repeatedly unable to open a container to get a prey, it might eventually give up and even lash out by pulling or biting at the container, analogous to a frustrated child tossing a tricky toy. They also exhibit curiosity. An octopus given a novel object often first tastes it, then, if not edible, still spends time touching and manipulating it, as if to understand it. Some have described octopuses as having a sense of mischief, like the ones that intentionally block outflow pipes in their tank, causing it to overflow. A documented case where octopuses in a lab would stuff their tank's drains with crabs or rocks, perhaps because the flowing water was annoying or just to see what happens, ultimately flooding the lab floor. Such actions seem driven by something beyond instinct, a kind of exploratory motive that might be labeled curious, willful, or mischievous, if we were to anthropomorphize. From a biological standpoint, we can consider what neuromolecules octopuses have. They possess many of the same neurotransmitters that modulate mood in us: serotonin, dopamine, octopamine, similar to norepinephrine in invertebrates, etc. One fascinating experiment gave octopuses the drug MDMA, known as ecstasy in humans, which primarily boosts serotonin. Normally, octopuses are asocial and even antisocial except when mating. But on low doses of MDMA, the typically solitary octopuses actually became more interested in interacting. They spent more time touching and exploring other octopuses placed nearby, instead of avoiding them. This suggests that the serotonin system in octopuses might play a similar role in social reward as it does in us, even though octopuses don't form friendships in the wild. It was a strong indication that at a chemical level, some building blocks of emotion and social behavior are conserved. That doesn't mean an octopus feels love like we do, but it might feel a positive affect or reward that could underlie bonding if their lifestyle required it. It's also worth mentioning octopus maternal behavior. A female octopus lays eggs and then painstakingly cares for them for weeks or months, tending and aerating them, all the while not eating. It is a tragic irony that most octopus mothers die shortly after their eggs hatch. They essentially invest all their energy into the next generation. During that brooding period, one could argue the female is in a sort of maternal drive state, laser-focused on care to the point of ignoring hunger. Is that emotion? It's at least a strong, biologically driven state that has analogies to how higher animals feel compelled to nurture offspring. If we broaden emotion to mean internal motivational states, then yes, the mother octopus experiences something powerful enough to override even the drive to eat. From emotions, we transition naturally to a concept of agency in self. Does an octopus have a sense of self? We mentioned earlier how it distinguishes its own arms by touch to avoid grabbing itself. But deeper, does it know? I am an octopus, these arms are mine, and I am separate from the environment. Some experiments hint that octopuses might have a basic sense of body ownership. They don't react to their mirror image like a mammal might, but they recognize when something is touching them versus something else. They also can navigate environments and seem to remember spatial layouts, implying they make mental maps, which requires distinguishing the world from the navigating self. On the social side, recognizing individual humans means it can label other and perhaps friend or foe, which is a precursor to social emotions and sense of self in relation to others. This is admittedly speculative, but the mosaic of evidence, learning, pain, affect, play, personality, all point to cephalopods being far more than stimulus response machines. They likely have internal experiences of a kind even if alien to us. Philosopher Peter Godfrey Smith, who has spent time observing wild octopuses, suggests that octopuses might have a form of consciousness that is less unified than ours because of their distributed brain, but still there in some form, a series of local consciousnesses, or a diffuse one. He describes interacting with octopuses and feeling a genuine sense of being evaluated by another mind. The octopus's eyes, after all, look back with an intensity that many find uncanny, as if someone is home in there. In summary, while we must be careful not to project our own emotions wholesale onto octopuses, the accumulating data shows complex behavioral and physiological responses that align with what we'd call emotional and personality differences. At the very least, octopuses exhibit sentience. They sense and react in sophisticated ways that go beyond reflex, indicating internal states. They can be said to have likes and dislikes, to experience stress or comfort, and to remember positive and negative outcomes in a way that guides future behavior. These are the ingredients of what, in higher animals, we label joy, fear, anger, etc. Cephalopods give us a tantalizing glimpse of an emotional life in an utterly different brain, and that again challenges our understanding of mind. It suggests that feelings are not exclusive to creatures with fur and feathers. Even a boneless mollusk can have a form of them, arising from a completely distinct neural design. Having considered cognition and emotion, let us now examine how the octopus coordinates its many parts into a coherent whole. After all, having bits of intelligence in each arm and a big brain on top is fine, but how does it all come together so that the octopus can do something as elegant as snaring a swift shrimp or orchestrating a daring escape. We turn to coordination, how octopuses manage complex movement and behavior with distributed control. Bouldering. 8 arms, how modular control becomes unified action. At first glance, an octopus's movements can look chaotic. Arms flutter and curl in all directions as it explores a reef, giving an impression of complete randomness. One might wonder, is there any order or plan, or is the octopus just a tangle of impulses? Closer observation reveals that despite the freedom each limb has, octopus behavior is far from haphazard when it matters. The animal can pounce with precision on a prey, or slide gracefully into a crevice, or swim in a directed jet-propelled burst. These actions require coordination among the arms and between the arms and the central brain. How does the octopus achieve this, given its unique neural setup? When an octopus hunts, it often employs a strategy that could be described as distributed yet focused. Imagine a common scenario. The octopus is tucked into a lair like a rocky hole, with only its eyes and maybe the tips of some arms peeking out. A crab scuttles by. The octopus swivels an eye toward it. In a flash, it decides to strike. Now, which arm does it use? You might think, with 8 arms, any random one will do, but studies have shown that octopuses actually have preferred arms for certain tasks. In fact, researchers noticed that despite appearances, octopuses tend to lead an attack with a specific arm most of the time. Often the second arm from the middle, on the side of the body that has the best view of the prey. In other words, if the octopus's right eye sees the crab, it will typically shoot out an arm from the right side, often the one just next to the center line on that side. It's a bit like having a dominant hand, except it's side-dependent and linked to where the octopus is looking. This reveals that the brain is indeed making a deliberate choice in the moment about which arm to employ, rather than all arms, acting willy-nilly. Moreover, the octopus adjusts its tactics based on prey type. If it's a slow, cumbersome crab, the octopus might simply lunge and pounce, leading with that chosen arm and quickly wrapping other nearby arms around to secure the meal. This is a high-speed, forceful strategy. One could liken it to a cat pouncing on a mouse. On the other hand, if the prey is a quick, jumpy shrimp that might dart away, octopuses adopt a more cautious approach. They'll extend the chosen arm more slowly, trying not to startle the shrimp. And often once that arm contacts the shrimp, the arms immediately adjacent, on either side of the lead arm, will quickly join in to form a 3-armed cage around the prey. This shows a dynamic coordination. The brain not only picks the arm, but also choreographs a sequence, lead with arm number X quietly, then deploy neighbors Y and Z for backup. The result is a successful capture of a prey that requires finesse. It's fascinating that such coordination doesn't require an internal rigid body plan like ours. We, humans, have an internal map of our body, a somatotopic map in the brain that tells us where our limbs are and allows precise control. Octopuses seem to lack a stable map of each arm's position at all times, given how flexible and variable their body is. A fixed map would not be very useful. Instead, they likely coordinate through continuous feedback. Each arm's sensory feedback, touch, tension, position, flows to the brain, and the brain can dynamically integrate that to get a sense of where things are. Some scientists hypothesize that octopus higher brain centers focus less on spatial mapping and more on temporal patterns, essentially the timing of signals and sequences of actions. This ties into a concept we'll touch on later, the idea that octopus cognition might be more about time-based control, when to do things, rather than building a 3D model of the world in the brain. One clue supporting this: experiments haven't definitively shown strong proprioception, self-position sense in octopuses, They might not precisely know an arm's position unless they see it or feel significant resistance. Yet they perform coordinated actions by using feedback in real time. It's as if the arms and brain are in a constant conversation. I'm reaching out now, I hit something, adjust this way, got it. The central brain orchestrates the overall performance much like a conductor leading a jazz ensemble, giving cues but also allowing improvisation from the players who listen and react to each other's notes. Another aspect of coordination is how octopuses move their entire body. They have essentially two modes, crawling and swimming, jetting. Crawling involves the arms working like alternating anchors and pulleys along the sea floor. An octopus can decide to scuttle to the left. It then pushes with some arms and pulls with others in a surprisingly well-coordinated crawl. There's evidence that octopuses don't have a preferred gait like a four-legged animal does. They can start crawling in any direction relative to their body orientation without needing to turn their body first. One moment, arm number 3 becomes the lead pulling arm. The next moment, arm number 7 might take over if the octopus changes direction. This again suggests that rather than fixed motor patterns, the octopus uses a more flexible system. Any arm can take on any role as needed. But behind the scenes, the brain likely sets a general rhythm or goal, akin to saying, move in that direction at moderate speed. And then the arms self-organize to fulfill it. Now consider jet-propelled swimming. When an octopus decides to flee swiftly, it shoots water out of its siphon, creating a jet that propels it backward. Here, the coordination is more central. The brain triggers a giant fiber reflex that simultaneously contracts mantle muscles to expel water. The arms are usually trailed behind or streamlined to reduce drag. This is more of an all-or-man response and is probably one of the few times an octopus behaves almost reflexively like a simpler animal, because in dire straits there's no time for fancy maneuvering, just blast off. Even so, the octopus can aim its jet by orienting the siphon, and it often uses its arms to steer as it rockets away, adjusting posture mid-slide to glide into a hiding spot. So even in fleeing, there's a mix of automatic and controlled coordination. To delve deeper into neural coordination, the octopus's brain has a complex of basal lobes, analogous in some ways to vertebrate basal ganglia, and a brachial plexus that connects to each arm's nerve cord. Motor commands from the brain travel down through the pedal lobes, which are like motor centers, into the arms. Meanwhile, each arm's ganglia can generate patterns, but they also report back via sensory neurons to the brain what's happening. There is a continuous feedback loop. For example, if an arm touches a prey, sensory signals immediately inform the brain, which might then cue other arms. Arm 2 has found something. Arms 1 and 3 help out. This could happen via interarm interneurons or via the brain acting as a hub. In fact, there are connectives in the octopus nervous system that directly connect arms to each other at the base, so not all communication has to go up to the brain. Some arm-to-arm coordination can happen locally. It's as though the arms have a chat line among themselves. If one arm grabs something large, neighboring arms might reflexively assist, even before the brain specifically commands it, because local circuits tell them. We have a big object. Help secure it. Coordinating 8 arms also involves inhibition. If all arms acted freely, they could interfere with each other. The brain likely sends inhibitory signals to certain arms at times, essentially telling some to stay out of the way while others work. Think of when an octopus is unscrewing a jar lid with 2 arms. The other arms might be gently holding the jar or simply not getting in the way. How do those others know not to bar? This could be an active decision by the octopus, focusing on using a subset of arms while damping activity in the rest. Some experiments indicate octopuses can show a form of specialization by task. For instance, They might use the front arms more for exploring and the rear arms more for anchoring the body. So there is a division of labor that can emerge, depending on context, suggesting the brain can assign roles dynamically. An intriguing study from 2022 found a surprising amount of predictability in octopus hunting behavior, where at first glance chaos reigned. As mentioned, octopuses always led with that second arm on the eye side. The researchers who filmed hours of octopus attacks were actually shocked at how reliable this was. For a creature often thought to be unpredictable, in a given scenario, it showed a stereotyped method. This hints that octopus coordination, while flexible, also uses fixed action patterns when they're advantageous. When catching prey, certain arms are primed to act because evolution probably wired them to do so for efficiency. But since an octopus can approach prey from any orientation, it evolved this rule: use the arm that's right under the eye, currently tracking prey. That's both logical and flexible. It's a rule that adapts to circumstance. It's akin to us reaching with whichever hand is closer to an object, but more predetermined in the sense of arm numbering. From coordination of movement, we can extrapolate to coordination of the whole animal's behavior. An octopus is essentially a distributed system that manages to behave as a coherent agent. This unity is an accomplishment of the nervous system, to bind sensation and action from multiple sources into one trajectory of behavior. Neuroscientists sometimes discuss the binding problem of consciousness, how disparate sensory inputs get unified into one experience. The octopus presents a version of the binding problem for motor control, how disparate effectors, arms, get unified into one purposeful action or sequence. The solution it evolved might involve a lot of parallel processing, each arm doing its thing, combined with just enough central oversight to keep everything aligned with a goal. In modern cognitive science terms, one could say the octopus embodies a form of parallel distributed processing, or even a biological model of a multi-agent system. Multiple, semi-independent agents, the arms, coordinate to achieve global objectives set by the central brain. The arms have local goals, grasp that usually serve the organism's overall goal: find food, escape danger. Occasionally there might be conflicts. Perhaps two arms want to go into the same crevice, but the octopus resolves these either through direct arm-to-arm interaction or via the brain adjudicating, "Hey arms, focus, we're doing this now." Think of it like a team with one captain. The team members have autonomy to act, but the captain can shout an order that synchronizes them when needed. Coordination also applies to sensor and motor integration. Each arm not only moves but also senses. So, coordination means combining information from arms and eyes and skin to make decisions. The octopus's ability to integrate touch and vision is well documented. It can learn that a certain texture it feels corresponds to a visual shape it sees. For example, experiments trained octopuses to associate a rough object with a particular visual cue for food reward. They could then, after training, choose correctly by sight or by touch alone. This implies the brain merges information from arms and eyes somewhere, likely in the higher centers like the frontal and basal lobes, to form a cohesive percept or decision. It's similar to how we integrate sight and touch, finding a light switch in the dark by feeling where we last saw it. The octopus likely doesn't form a 3D mental model in the same way we do, but it clearly correlates and cross-references sensory data from different modalities to guide its actions. So, an octopus achieving a feat like opening a jar is a triumph of coordination. Here's a stepwise imagined breakdown. The octopus sees the jar and smells the prey inside, sensory input. The central brain decides, "I want that food," motivation. The brain perhaps recalls past experiences with objects, memory from vertical lobe. Maybe it has opened a screw top before, or it will learn now. It sends a plan. Arms, interact with this object. 2 or 3 arms respond by reaching out. They're suckers searching the jar's surface. One finds the lid seam, the others brace the jar. The tactile feedback of the ridged lid is relayed to the brain, recognizing this part moves. The brain might then bias actions. Twist that arm. The arm on the lid begins to talk. Local control in that arm coordinates suckers to maintain grip as it twists. Another arm keeps the jar stable, maybe without the brain explicitly saying, "Hold jar." The arm simply reacts to the jar moving by counter-gripping, a reflex that incidentally stabilizes it. After some trial and error, the lid pops. The smell of prey intensifies. A positive feedback. The brain gets that input and reinforces the current actions. Good, continue. The arms then jointly remove the lid, and one arm dives in to grab the prey. Throughout this, the octopus had to coordinate multiple arms with different roles, using continuous sensory feedback. If one arm failed to grip properly, the brain or local reflex tries a different approach. It's a dance of 8 dancers and a conductor who sometimes lets them improvise. In the end, coordination in the octopus is both rigorously mechanistic in some ways. There are clearly some fixed preferences and reflex loops to make sure things usually work, and wonderfully improvised in others. The creature can invent new maneuvers on the spot for novel problems. This balance is likely what allowed octopuses to exploit so many ecological niches, from reefs with lots of crevices to sandy bottoms where they carry coconut shells as tools. Yes, veined octopuses have been observed collecting coconut shell halves to assemble as a shelter later. A kind of tool use that requires planning and coordination to carry 2 awkward halves under its arms, as it walks on the other arms. As we marvel at their coordination, we start seeing how many parallels there are between an octopus's cognitive feats and those of vertebrates, despite the different architecture. For instance, learning from feedback? Check. They learn by trying and adjusting. Integrating senses? Check. Tool use and problem solving? Check. Social recognition? Check. Even if they aren't social by nature, they recognize individuals. Yet all this is achieved with a network-like, distributed control system that has no central torso or skeleton to simplify matters. It's like a distributed computer network accomplishing what a big single mainframe might. Different design, same outcome. Having looked at how octopuses coordinate their actions in waking life, an intriguing question arises. Do they also coordinate neural activity in sleep? In other words, do octopuses sleep and perhaps even dream as higher vertebrates do? This leads us into the next fascinating topic: the sleep patterns of cephalopods, and what they might tell us about the evolution of sleep and the possibility of octopus dreams. Sleep and dreams in cephalopods. Even the busiest minds need rest, and it appears octopuses are no exception. It may sound curious to ask if an octopus sleeps. After all, they're so different from us, but researchers have found that octopuses and cuttlefish exhibit clear sleep-like states. In a quiet aquarium in the dead of night, an octopus will often be found tucked into a corner or its den, arms curled up, skin pale and smooth, respiration slow, a posture that looks for all the world like a sleeping animal. For a long time, that's all we really knew. They have periods of quiescence and likely rest their nervous system. However, in recent years, scientists have dug deeper, and what they discovered is startling. Octopuses don't just have a simple on/off sleep. They have sleep cycles strikingly reminiscent of vertebrate sleep, including an active phase akin to REM, rapid eye movement, sleep in humans. In one study, researchers observed octopuses over many hours and recorded their skin color, muscular twitches, and eye movements. They identified 2 distinct sleep stages. The first is a quiet sleep. The octopus is very still, skin is uniformly pale or gently camouflaged in a static pattern, and the eyes show no rapid movement. This quiet sleep can last for several minutes at a time. Then, periodically, the octopus will enter a brief active sleep phase. During active sleep, the octopus's skin comes alive with changing colors and patterns, flashing stripes, spots, sudden blushing, dark or pale, and its muscles may twitch, especially around the eyes or suckers. The eyes, behind closed eyelids if it has them, as some species do have a kind of lid, show movements, and the body may briefly shift posture. This phase is short, on the order of tens of seconds to maybe a minute. Then the octopus returns to quiet sleep. The cycle repeats in a regular fashion through the sleep period. If this sounds familiar, it's because mammals and birds and some reptiles also cycle between quiet non-REM and active REM sleep, with REM characterized by rapid eye movements and often vivid dreams in humans. The implications are exciting. Why would an octopus have an active sleep stage? In humans and other mammals, REM sleep is associated with dreaming and is thought to play roles in memory consolidation and brain development. Could it be that octopuses, with their complex brains, also benefit from a form of dream-filled sleep? It is tempting to say yes, and indeed, many news headlines have suggested octopuses might dream. We have to be careful. We don't know what's going on in their mind during active sleep, but consider what we observe. An octopus during active sleep might rapidly shift through a series of patterns that it uses in waking life. For example, one could start pale, then suddenly display a high contrast, mottled pattern, then an alarm dark color with papillae, little spikes, raised, then back to camo. One biologist poetically speculated that perhaps the octopus was reliving a recent experience, say dreaming about hunting a crab. First it's camouflaged, pale, blending with sand. Then it sees a crab, flash spots of excitement. Then it attacks, dark dramatic patterns. Then it goes back to resting camo. Of course, we can't know if that's true, but it's not implausible the brain activity in octopuses hasn't been recorded during these phases, because hooking up an EEG to an octopus is quite challenging. But behaviorally and physiologically, this active sleep resembles REM enough to suspect a similar function. Even cuttlefish, those other clever cephalopods, have shown REM-like sleep. In one study, cuttlefish at rest would occasionally flutter their eyelids, move their eyes back and forth, and change skin colors, all hallmarks of an active sleep phase. So this phenomenon might be common to advanced cephalopods. That suggests that the common ancestor of octopus and cuttlefish, which lived maybe 300 million years ago, already had evolved a need for structured sleep. Or, alternatively, that octopus and cuttlefish evolved it in parallel due to having complex brains that need offline processing. Either way, it's a brilliant example of convergent evolution. Cephalopods and vertebrates again, independently, converge on a similar solution. In this case, sleep architecture, presumably because it's beneficial for neural function. Why would an octopus need sleep? Sleep likely serves similar roles in them as in other animals: restoration of biochemical balance in the brain, energy conservation. An octopus in quiet sleep uses less oxygen, and, importantly, memory processing. Octopuses have intense learning experiences each day, hunting, exploring, encountering novel things. It makes sense biologically that they might strengthen important memories, and perhaps prune irrelevant ones during sleep. Active sleep is often linked to processing of memories and learning tasks in vertebrates. So an octopus might be consolidating a memory of how it solved a puzzle, or mapping a new territory in its dreams. There's also a protective logic. Many octopuses are primarily active during certain periods. Some are nocturnal, others crepuscular. During downtime, instead of staying alert, which costs energy, it's better to hunker down in a safe spot and turn off for a while. as long as you can wake up quickly if a threat comes. Indeed, experimenters found that octopuses during sleep will respond if strongly stimulated. You wouldn't want to do this on a whim, but for science they gently prodded or gave a vibration. In quiet sleep, an octopus is harder to wake than when it's merely resting but alert, indicating it's in a true sleep state, not just relaxation. However, if the stimulus is significant, like a strong poke or sudden bright light, the octopus can jolt awake, often instantly shifting to a defensive color or jetting away. This shows that even though they sleep, octopuses retain some level of responsiveness to critical stimuli, much as we might bolt awake to a loud noise. After all, in the ocean you can't afford to be completely oblivious, or you might get eaten during your nap. The discovery of octopus sleep cycles invites a philosophical question. Do octopuses dream? If dreaming is defined as having internal sensory-like experiences during sleep, we cannot know for sure. But if any invertebrate were to dream, the octopus is the best candidate. Perhaps their dreams are rudimentary, like replaying patterns of neural activity from the day. Or maybe they experience something as vivid to them as our dreams are to us. Oh, it's a strange thought. The octopus, with its decentralized brain, might have dreams that are decentralized too. Could each arm's local network replay motor patterns leading to twitching, while the central brain generates visual flashes, hence the color changes? If so, is the octopus aware of these images as a narrative? Or is it just disjointed activity? We don't know. But consider how remarkable it is that nature has arrived at this state, an animal so far from us on the tree of life that nevertheless curls up to sleep and possibly to dream, as if intelligence of any kind eventually stumbles on the need to disconnect and simulate reality for itself as it rests. Sleep in octopuses also hints that they might undergo a kind of offline learning or creativity. Some theories of dreams in humans suggest that dreams can be a playground for the brain to find novel solutions to problems or to simulate threats, the threat simulation hypothesis of dreaming. Could an octopus's active sleep help it refine hunting strategies or practice reactions? It's not outlandish. If a cuttlefish can show a new camouflage pattern in its sleep that it saw earlier while awake, that indicates memory. For example, I recall an anecdote. A pet octopus that had encountered and inked at a researcher later during an active sleep bout suddenly expelled a tiny bit of ink while flashing a high-contrast pattern. One can help but wonder, was it nightmaring about something that scared it, hence inking defensively even while asleep? These are singular observations, not yet science, but they provoke hypotheses that can be tested in time. The presence of sleep and probable dreams in cephalopods deepens the philosophical implications of their intelligence. Sleep is closely tied to brain complexity and perhaps consciousness. If octopuses have a form of consciousness, being aware in some sense when awake, the fact they have a REM-like state suggests they could have an analogue of a subconscious processing state in sleep. It underscores that for all their differences, octopus brains perform the same fundamental tasks brains everywhere do: perceive, act, learn, remember, and go offline to recalibrate. Let's not forget squid in this context. Squid likely sleep too, though it's harder to observe in the wild because many are pelagic, open water, and might rest at certain depths or times. Captive squids under observation can enter a largely still state with rhythmic changes in skin as well, though less is published about them. Cuttlefish have been studied more due to easier aquarium keeping, showing clear sleep cycles. It wouldn't be surprising if all advanced cephalopods require sleep to maintain their cognitive sharpness, a common need for neural maintenance. An amusing but illuminating thought experiment. If an octopus dreams, what would it dream about? With their short lifespans, most live only 1-2 years, They mature quickly and face many novel experiences rapidly. Perhaps their dreams consolidate those. A young octopus might dream of the first time it encountered a lobster and had to decide fight or flight, merging memory and instinct to handle it better next time. Or maybe an octopus dreams in sensations, the feel of water currents, the taste of a clam, the visual kaleidoscope of a coral garden. If indeed their mind is less centralized, maybe their dreams are more fragmentary, like a chorus of sensations rather than a coherent story. This enters speculation territory, but it's a fun way to appreciate how enigmatic the inner life of a cephalopod remains, even as we confirm so many parallels to ourselves. Understanding that octopuses have such rich behavioral and physiological complexity, learning, tool use, possible emotions, possible dreams, yet organize it through a decentralized neural network, brings us to a grander reflection. What does the octopus teach us about the architecture of cognition and the nature of mind? How does a distributed consciousness or modular intelligence change our perspective on thinking? In animals, in hypothetical aliens, or even in artificial systems we might build? In our final section, we'll step back and consider these broader implications, tying in frameworks like embodied cognition, active inference, and the possibilities of alien minds and AI inspired by octopus intelligence. Distributed control and the architecture of mind. Lessons from the octopus. The octopus forces us to confront an idea that the human experience doesn't prepare us for. Intelligence need not be unified or centralized to be effective. For us, with a big brain in one head, it's natural to assume a singular command center runs the show of mind. The octopus, with its network of semi-independent neural regions, suggests a different paradigm emerging from the collaboration of many parts. This invites comparisons to several conceptual frameworks and fuels speculation in fields beyond marine biology, from philosophy of mind to artificial intelligence. One useful framework to invoke is embodied cognition, which posits that an organism's body, its form, and its interactions with the physical world is not just a vessel for the brain, but an integral component of its cognitive processes. The octopus is an exemplary case of embodied cognition. Its form, soft, flexible, lacking rigid structure, and the way its arms directly sense and manipulate the world suggest that much of its thinking happens through doing. As we saw, an octopus doesn't pre-plan every arm movement in its head. It uses the arm as a smart probe to gather information and solve problems on the fly. The shape and capabilities of the arms, for instance, being able to conform to any crevice, or the suction and tasting ability of suckers, reduce the need for complex internal modeling. The world itself becomes the canvas on which the octopus's thoughts play out. In robotics, this principle is known as morphological computation. The body's physical dynamics can carry out computations that the brain would otherwise have to do. The octopus exemplifies this. Its supple arms automatically distribute force when wrapping around an object, without any central calculation of the object's exact shape. The physical compliance of the arm computes the grasp. From an embodied cognition perspective, the octopus's intelligence is radically embodied, even more so than our own, because it lacks the simplifying scaffolding of a skeleton that keeps our movements predictable. It's as if the octopus lives in a continual feedback loop with its environment, its body forming half of its mind, so to speak. Interestingly, some proponents of embodied cognition often emphasize that the body's fixed structure encodes knowledge, like how having jointed legs encodes an efficient way to walk. But as philosopher Peter Godfrey-Smith noted, the octopus breaks even that notion. Its body is so protean that it doesn't have a stable structure to fall back on. The octopus can pour itself through a hole the size of a coin or balloon out and display diomatic, startling patterns when threatened. Peter Godfrey-Smith when threatened. This fluidity means the typical division of brain vs body blurs. The octopus body is partly neural, since neurons are everywhere and the brain extends into the body. If embodied cognition is usually about how the brain uses the body's structure, in an octopus we have a case where the body has almost no structure, so the embodiment is about direct, moment-to-moment adaptability. Perhaps the lesson here is that cognition can be embodied in real time, not just fixed in form. The octopus might embody a kind of hyper-flexible intelligence that is less about storing information in a static brain map and more about continuously enacting intelligence through movement and sensation. Another relevant framework is active inference, from theoretical neuroscience, which describes how organisms act to minimize surprise and uncertainty in their sensory inputs. An octopus is a beautifully illustrative, active inference machine. Instead of sitting still and passively perceiving, an octopus is almost always doing something, extending an arm here, changing color there, in order to probe its environment by acting, tasting surfaces, feeling textures, poking into holes. It actively gathers information that reduces uncertainty about where prey might be or whether a space is safe. Each arm, in a sense, performs active inference on a local scale. If an arm is curious, what's in this crevice, it will wiggle inside, perhaps guided by a slight odor of crab, thereby testing that hypothesis. If a crab is felt, great, great. If not, the arm moves on. Meanwhile, the central brain infers from all arms' inputs where to direct attention next. The octopus's decentralized design could even be seen as parallel active inference processes, multiple arms exploring simultaneously, each trying to resolve uncertainty in its sector, the results then integrating into the octopus's overall perception of the world. This parallelism might make the octopus extremely efficient at gathering information. 8 arms can search 8 nooks at once, after all. Predictive coding, a related idea, suggests the brain constantly generates predictions of sensory input, and only errors, magmas, get propagated for updating the internal model. How might this work in an octopus? Some theorists have speculated that instead of a detailed body schema, an octopus's brain might predict outcomes of actions in a more abstract way. If I send arm in direction X, I expect some tactile feedback after Y seconds. The arms themselves might implement local predictive models. For instance, a simple forward model in the arm's ganglia could predict, if I contract these muscles, the arm will bend this way, and use sensory feedback to adjust. The central brain might not predict every arm's position, but it could predict higher-level outcomes. I predict that by reaching there I will find food, because last time it did. If the prediction fails, it adjusts strategy. In a sense, because the octopus's nervous system is so distributed, perhaps each module makes predictions. The optic lobes predict visual patterns. They have memory too for visual habituation. The arms predict motor outcomes. The vertical lobe might predict reward based on memory. Last time I ate a snail, it tasted bad, so predict that snail will be bad. Avoid it. The predictive processing is not funneled into one global model as might be in our brain, but rather done in a context-specific way throughout the network. This is speculative, but it shows one could reinterpret octopus behavior in modern cognitive terms. Doing so often highlights how nature finds alternative implementations of these principles. Now, philosophically, what does it mean to have a distributed consciousness? If indeed the octopus has subjective experience, is it one experience or many? Does the octopus feel as one entity or as a collection of semi-independent parts? We, as humans, have a unified stream of consciousness. At least it feels unified. The octopus might have a less integrated one. Some philosophers have mused that perhaps each arm has a kind of rudimentary awareness of what it's touching, for instance, and the central brain has its own awareness that integrates some of those signals. Maybe the octopus is a combination of one and many, a sort of microcosm of a society where each arm is like an individual and the octopus is like the society yet also an individual in its own right. If that's the case, octopus consciousness, if it exists, could be more dissociated than ours. It might not feel a sharp distinction between me and my arm, because me is partly in each arm. To the octopus, the question might not even pass. The arms are just part of the overall process of being an octopus. It might be similar to how we can do things unconsciously, like drive a familiar route while daydreaming. Perhaps an octopus's arms sometimes operate unconsciously to the central awareness when doing routine tasks, only alerting the central mind when something interesting happens. This is analogous to how our spinal cord handles walking without us thinking of each step unless something trips us. Thus, the octopus offers a provocative natural experiment in consciousness, showing that the unity of consciousness is not a given, but rather something that could be more distributed, possibly fragmented, yet functional. These considerations bear on how we think about intelligence in general, including artificial intelligence, AI. Much AI today and historically has been inspired by human cognition, e.g., neural networks loosely inspired by our cortex, or symbolic AI inspired by our logic and language. The octopus suggests alternative architectures. Imagine an AI composed of multiple modules that work semi-independently and only loosely coordinate. In fact, some approaches in AI already do this. Multi-agent systems, ensemble learning, subsumption architecture in robotics, where simple agents coordinate to produce complex behavior. For instance, a robot inspired by an octopus might have many independently controlled tentacles, each with its own mini-processor, like an arm's ganglion, plus a central processor that issues high-level goals. This could make the robot more adaptable and robust. If one limb fails, others can carry on. And it could handle multiple tasks in parallel. Researchers have indeed looked at octopus biology for designing soft robots that can squeeze through holes, or underwater vehicles that use flexible limbs for manipulation. On the software side of AI, the idea of not having a single central CPU, but many distributed processing nodes that work concurrently, is basically how modern neural networks operate. Billions of artificial neurons computing in parallel. But typically those networks still have a unified training goal. Perhaps a truly octopus-like AI would involve separate networks for each arm that sometimes share information but can also behave somewhat independently with their own goals, only aligning on larger objectives. This could lead to AI that is more resilient and creative, at the cost or benefit of not always having a single-minded purpose. Think of an AI managing a smart home. An octopus-inspired design might have each room's subsystem manage itself, lights, climate, etc., and a central AI just coordinating overall comfort. Each subsystem could learn the preferences for its room, sunlight patterns, usage, and the central system just ensures they don't conflict or overspend energy. This decentralized AI might be more fault-tolerant. If central goes down, rooms still function, and adaptive locally. Considering alien intelligence, we often wonder what extraterrestrial intelligent life might be like. The octopus is a reminder that even on our own planet, cognition can take radically different forms. An alien that evolved in a different environment might not have a humanoid brain at all. It could have multiple processing centers or a distributed network. Imagine a colony creature where each individual is like a neuron in a larger mind, or a plant-like life form with intelligence spread across root and branch. Octopus intelligence shows that a creature without a spine, without our kind of social structure, can nonetheless develop problem-solving ability, curiosity, and maybe even consciousness. So when speculating about aliens, the octopus broadens the scope of the possible. It's often said that octopuses are the closest thing to meeting an alien because of how differently their brain is structured, despite their evident intellect. If we ever communicate with an alien, Understanding octopus cognition might offer valuable lessons. For example, the alien's mind might not be localized. We might have to interact with various parts of it to truly engage it. Finally, reflect on what the octopus tells us about mind and agency philosophically. Traditional Western philosophy, influenced by the human experience, has often seen the mind as a unitary, rational agent controlling a body. The octopus kind of laughs at that notion. It's more like a federation of agents, but it still gets things done effectively. It suggests that what we call agency might not require a single will, but can emerge from multiple wills cooperating. In the octopus's case, those wills are tightly bound in one organism by evolution. But one could draw parallels to collective intelligence, like an ant colony or a human society, where intelligence emerges from many individuals acting in concert. The octopus is an individual that contains multitudes. In our own minds, modern neuroscience recognizes we too have modular aspects, different brain regions and networks that often work unconsciously and sometimes even at odds, like emotional impulses, be as rational thought. Yet we experience a unified self, more or less. The octopus might not have had to evolve such a strongly unified self because its lifestyle didn't demand complex social strategizing or language or self-reflection. Its intelligence is very much about doing things in the physical world by oneself. Perhaps the octopus is content with a more functional unity. Enough integration to survive and reproduce, no need for a tight narrative I. That is speculation, but it's intriguing to consider. Minds that exist primarily for action, what some cognitive scientists call inactive cognition. The idea that perception and action are primary and abstract thought is secondary. The octopus is like an existence proof of inactive cognition. It perceives in order to act, and each action leads to new perception, in a continual sensorimotor dance. As we wrap up this deep dive into cephalopod brains, take a moment to marvel at the imaginative leap nature took with octopuses and squid. These animals have provided endless inspiration, from sailors' tales of the kraken and sea monsters, likely inspired by giant squid and octopus's uncanny abilities, to today's scientists and philosophers probing what they can tell us about intelligence. We've seen that an octopus can open jaws, recognize people, possibly experience pain and play, coordinate a body of moving parts, and even might dream, all with a brain architecture so different from our own that early researchers weren't even sure if it had a brain. 19th century biologists were perplexed by the donut-shaped brain around the throat. Now we know the cephalopod brain is a sophisticated network that in many respects parallels vertebrate brains. They even have analogues of our memory and motor centers, as we saw, but also introduces novel principles like highly decentralized control and the outsourcing of computation to the body. Studying cephalopods not only satiates curiosity about these wondrous creatures, it holds a mirror up to our assumptions about minds. It asks us, what is the essence of intelligence? Is it a certain structure, like a cortex? Clearly not, because octopuses have none and are still intelligent. Is it the number of neurons? Octopuses have a lot for invertebrates, but raw count alone doesn't guarantee smarts. Some fish have fewer neurons but still complex behavior, for example. It seems more about organization and use of neurons. Octopuses show that having specialized subnetworks that interact can yield flexible behavior. In a way, they are natural experiments in brain design, and nature tested a design where sensori-motor loops were distributed, and it worked amazingly well. In the niche of a short-lived yet clever predator. In conclusion, the cephalopod brain demonstrates that there isn't just one blueprint for building an intelligent mind. Theirs is modular, embodied, active, and distributed. Yet, for all its alien qualities, when you interact with an octopus, You can't shake the feeling that you are encountering a fellow thinking being. It might solve problems in unfamiliar ways, but solve them it does. It might feel with an emotional palate we don't fully grasp, but it clearly can be content or distressed. It sleeps, perhaps it dreams. Its arms reach out as if curious, and perhaps also, in some way, mindful, tasting the world in every sense of the word. The octopus invites us to broaden our concept of the mind, to include networks and appendages, to allow that intelligence can be watery and diffuse rather than solid state and centralized. It suggests that mind and life find a way, whether in a monkey swinging through trees with a singular brain, or an octopus gliding through coral with 8 semi-independent arms. For scholars, this is a treasure trove of comparative insight. For storytellers, it's a natural narrative of an alien on our planet. And for everyone else, it's a humbling reminder that human intelligence is but one special case in a spectrum of possibilities. As we venture further into the age of AI and ponder meeting aliens among the stars, remembering the octopus's lesson, that there are many ways to be smart, might prove invaluable. Thus, the study of cephalopod brains not only deepens our appreciation of these captivating creatures, it also holds up a light to the nature of cognition itself, encouraging us to think outside the box, or rather, outside the skull. In the octopus and its modular intelligence, we find a living, writhing example that the brain does not monopolize the mind. Sometimes the entire body and beyond can be the mind, and that revelation is as profound as it is enchanting.